I think research R&D is something, is a concept even which we as African scientists and together with the African developers need to understand and come to a common onto a common platform and understanding of what it entails. If I take, for example, the fact that simple discoveries are made in the universities, sometimes these discoveries are made to the point where you have even identified the active ingredients, have demonstrated that they're safe in populations, have demonstrated that they're efficacious against the target diseases that these are meant to be. But it goes beyond that, because then the government, for example, needs to step in and invest in either creating startups and small and medium-sized enterprises. And once the economy of that particular undertaking takes roots, then you can now go and start looking for expansion. So we have to understand all these steps. And for us to be able to do that, first we must guarantee that the source of the raw material is going to be constant. Otherwise, we'll have to adopt new concepts in engineering and industry, which normally as biologists or as bioscientists we do not have. The first of them is synthesis. We need to know that we don't have to rush always to the natural source to derive our materials. It's now possible with technology to synthesize most of the starting blocks. The second one is standardization. If you know that a screw that is made in one industry can actually fit into a machine that was made from another industry, it's because they have defined at what angle the threads must be from the cap of the screw. The other issue is that you must look beyond the intrinsic values of the materials that we have. For example, copper can conduct electricity, but when you take copper and put it around a magnet and spin it, it generates electricity. So that's an abstraction of an intrinsic property that copper has. Now the last part is to decouple. And for us to be efficient in how we target and harness our resources naturally into being something that governments can say, this is contributing to the economy, we have to decouple the processes. Meaning that the person who goes to the natural source to obtain it and handles it must be different from that who is going to do the manipulations and the analysis, and must be different again from those who are going to actually take that into policy. Most of the knowledge that we have has not been translated in and uptaken for either for either decision makings or for promoting a particular product. And I think the missing link is that we need investors, we need venture capitalists who can effectively understand what we've made our discoveries and then transform those or inject the necessary funding to take those now into things that are directly applicable for human consumption.
You have mentioned increasing investment, such as venture capital, but currently we have a lot of scholars whose research remains in academic libraries and with little impact really. But my question right now is, how do you make R&D output really serve its purpose?
Well, I think the curriculum has to change. If I start off by understanding what went on in the 19th century, it was more about informative learning, where you produce the experts. It was about knowledge acquisition, basically. But in the 20th century, that changed. And you had to take the knowledge that you had gained and put it around certain social values. And that produced the professionals. In the 21st century, things have changed. They've moved on from being informative learning in the 19th century to formative learning in the 20th century. And nowadays we're talking more about transformative learning, which is about change agents. Now, the curriculum has to move away from what we had in the 1960s, which was basically colonial. And we have to move out of that and be able to arm our researchers, arm our scholars, both in knowledge that they've acquired, but also in aspects that define for them what is a professional or an expert in a particular domain. So that profile must be obtained. And nowadays, it doesn't just suffice for us to know the science and do the science. Because we have a better understanding of what the science is, we should also be taught how to translate that into a language which is understood by the decision makers. Some of the scientists have to go into decision making. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So we have to learn those other soft skills that would make us be able to translate. We have to learn the soft skills that will make us become even entrepreneurs. And to have an entrepreneurial spirit doesn't say that you must necessarily create an industry, but you must look at every aspect that you do and ask yourself, what impact is it going to make? So it's about creating impact. All this thing about entrepreneurship is about creating an impact in society. You can be business, but you can also look to change the status quo of what obtains as normal research nowadays, so that most of what is discovered must be taken to the next phase, and that's by the scientists acquiring other skills other than just knowledge acquisition in the science domains.
Currently, Africa relies heavily on foreign funding, but we've seen at the height of COVID-19 pandemic, these countries announcing plans to cut their budgets to overseas aid. The case in point is the UK Research and Innovation, which is a public body that announced to cut their overseas budget. Where do you think this leaves the continent?
Well, this is a good question, and which has made me ponder whether we really love this continent. And let me start by saying there is what the private sector can do, but there's also a huge responsibility on the government side. If I start first with the government side, the government necessarily and intentionally should support the private sector. There are moments where I know of professors in the universities in the United States who had a brilliant idea. They left the university, were supported by government to have their startups, and then these became, the small and medium-sized enterprises. And when they made the profit, they were now left off the hook. Now in Cameroon, I know that since 1999, they wrote into the constitution of the higher education that universities must have a free trade zone, which means that if there are brilliant ideas within the university, then these brilliant ideas can be transformed into little companies. They're given the grounds to set up these, and then later on show or demonstrate that it is profitable both to the university, but to the students as training grounds, but also is making an economic impact. And once it begins to have that impact on society, then the next stage is that you now can go private or you can go solo and then be able to pay your taxes so that you're also contributing to the economy. But then when it comes to the private sector has a lot of money. But all of them have been defined to exercise corporate social responsibility. But you do not see exactly where this corporate social responsibility is going to. So if we do as Nigeria has done, that they have taxed every company that is legally registered in Nigeria a 2% funding, they have been running something called the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, where money, this 2%, has been put into one common basket, and it is used to fund tertiary education across Nigeria. This is a huge, huge investment, and you're going to see the results because people are going to make discoveries. Sometimes not all of the time, but if you just take that 10% of all that is invested ends up in some discovery that can move to industry, then you can tell exactly where this is going. Now, if you look at the GDP of just 5 countries in Africa, and that's Angola, Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa, then you're talking about $1.4 quadrillion. Now, if you take just 1% of it, then it's going to give you about $14.3 billion. That's a huge amount of money. Now, if you look at exactly why there have been so many Nobel Prizes in the United States, it's because the government has invested in research, it's invested in small and medium-sized enterprises, it's invested in innovative grants to institutions, but also to individuals. And once those individuals have taken a strong foothold in what they're doing, then the next of the thing progresses. If you take the 10 richest people in Africa, if government is saying we cannot give you the money, and you take the 10 richest people in Africa, then their worth is about 65 or $66 billion worth. Now, if they just put aside as well 1% or 10%, as they may be as generous, then you can also tell exactly what huge amounts of money. And if you look among these individuals, 3 of them are telecom giants. Now, if you take those telecom companies and you ask that just 1 cent per call across the entire Africa is sent into a research fund, we'll be dealing with tons and loads of money to foster this research that we've so much been desiring. And we have to define it in our own way, our own model of research, not precisely what the Western world necessarily says we should follow as that. If you look at China, China exports a lot of its natural resources as, improved traditional remedies, or call it in the United States alternative remedies. But it's there. You take tea, I take chamomile when I want to sleep better. It's a herbal remedy. It's doing something. And therefore, if we can go back to these our natural resources and define what should be our own R&D the African way, having an hands-on approach, changing the curriculum, making sure that a number of soft skills are given to our students and our scholars, making sure that there are investors who can put in the little that they can, making sure that universities have grants administrations and patent offices, making sure that effectively the politicians themselves understand what is change leadership. Then I think that we would slowly be getting to the stage where everybody would turn around and says, hey, I'm proud, I'm African, I'm proud.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you too.